implementation moving forward, base of implementation. So I think that would be a very powerful policy, technical, let's say, concrete message that we can send to all of us. And of course, to the key stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll take one more here. Oh, and there's one at the back there, sorry. Oh, I didn't see you, sorry. Okay, him. And then at the back there.
Yes, I think this is a very important conversation we are having. I just want the signing of this agreement in March is not all to it. There are a lot of things to be done thereafter. And I'm very much concerned about the market access conditions that will be discussed, particularly on the issues of the schedule of tariffs, on the issue of the countries.
And what countries can agree on. But I think we have also, as policymakers, we have to be realistic and manage expectations. Having a consensus of 55 countries will take long. Now, how do we support our technical teams so that we understand what the big picture of this common market is? And I think I will link into the question of observation of the lady who also said, what is the quick wins that we can already look for? And I think on the side of Rwanda, it would be really the free movement of people and goods. As we've seen on the launch of the visa openness, I mean, it's no coincidence that countries in Africa that are attracting the most foreign FDIs are the ones who have an open visa policy, which Rwanda has embraced for African nationals, and since January, we actually, require visa on arrival for everyone, every citizen of the world. And we have to respect the legal process of each country, and I think Professor from Nigeria explained to us what the internal process is. However, I think as countries, as African countries as well, we have to really see what the cost of not being integrated is on the long run. In the long run, all the other continents, if we look at the EU or the Asian, they really have seen economic growth after integration. So Africa really needs to do it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. There were other questions, Trudy, particularly on the quick wins, what needs to be done. Do we really need the details before we start moving on this CFTA?
I think these are extremely important issues right now. I have 3 suggestions. The first one concerns the sector-specific commitments for the services sectors. These are extremely difficult to negotiate, and we have not started those yet. In fact, we haven't got the modalities for those negotiations yet. I would suggest that those be handled in phase 2. Phase 2 covers investment, competition, and intellectual property issues. And there's a clear logic to have those negotiations of those 4 sets of issues running concurrently. The interconnections between investment governance, sector commitments, particularly when we're talking trade and services, and mode 3, which is essentially foreign direct investment, is a very close one. So negotiating that collection of issues in tandem makes a lot of sense to get an internally consistent agreement. As far as the tariffs and rules of origin negotiations are concerned, it's ironic, ladies and gentlemen, that the tariff is references to revenue losses, and that's really important for some countries. But it is also an instrument used to protect domestic industry from import competition. So it is not unexpected that these negotiations have not yet begun, and we can expect them, as we've seen in the tripartite free trade area negotiations, for them to be complex, difficult, and protracted. But we've learned a lot of lessons, and we have information that already identifies for us where the key tariff barriers are on intra-Africa trade. Ladies and gentlemen, recall that we are not opening up all regional economic communities at this stage. They will continue to trade as they are. So SADC, ECOWAS, COMESA, EAC, they will all continue to trade. So it's really negotiations between parties that are not belonging to the same free trade area. But we don't know yet, take a long time, or whether they will be on a kind of MFN basis. In other words, a customs union or a member state makes an offer to all other member states. The risk taking that approach, ladies and gentlemen, is that we will tend towards the lowest common denominator. In other words, we will have limited liberalization. But there's a lot of support that can be provided so that we can move this process ahead. And I think that's really important. And the third one is the preparatory implementation program. We've heard through our discussion since yesterday that many of the challenges with regional integration are associated with implementation. We have, in a sense, a window to work on a comprehensive implementation agenda, to build our own capacity and to really look at interagency cooperation, because keep in mind that most of the implementation happens at national level, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But there is also a role for the regional economic communities, because after all, they've been implementing integration agendas, some for many decades. There's a lot that they can contribute to expedite the process, and we really need to use that experience and expertise.
Okay, I'm being told we only have 5 minutes left. I think there was a question regarding the tripartite. I think that has been answered. I think it's still very relevant. There are a lot of lessons that the current process, the continental process, can draw from, and I think there were a lot of lessons drawn from the tripartite that fed into the work that was being done at continent. Let me just say that the private sector is not going to wait for us. And some of them have already started expanding. We've seen companies going into other African countries of what the continental free trade area offers. Yesterday we heard that most of our countries are too small. We need economies of scale. We need to consolidate. So at the end of the day, I've been a negotiator myself, that we lose sight of the bigger picture. And I think the difference with the CFTA is that they do have now an advisory council of private sector champions who are pushing them to actually try and move very quickly. And I think this is an important aspect, because as trade negotiators, we tend to sometimes even push for positions that are not even in the interest of our own private sectors in our own countries. So I think really the idea is to look at the big picture and to look at the potential that we really, for most of us, we can't go it alone. We are putting infrastructure as the African Development Bank. We set aside about $1 billion every 3 years to build infrastructure that connects the continent, which is part of the PIDA program. We also, as part of that program, also look at how best we can look at the regulations, harmonizing regulations across. As the bank, we are also supporting, we've given a grant to the Africa Union Commission to try and push this process so that we can quickly start trading. Before I close, let me just give a minute each to each of our panelists.
I really don't have much to add to the need for each member country to be sure that they are ready to engage with their stakeholders by doing very careful and thorough and to over-dramatize the benefits and ignore the costs. But the cost comes first. So please, as you proceed in the various countries, even if you have signed, do a thorough analysis of the costs and benefits and the distribution of this cost among stakeholders to avoid resistance along the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think for me, in conclusion, and maybe I'm repeating myself, is more on looking at the benefits on a longer term, meaning if the citizens of our continent are not given opportunities to go explore first what's happening with their neighbors across the continent. We have heard yesterday in the opening remarks, the sharp difference between what we trade intra-Africa and what we trade with the outside world. There was, I think, one statistic that was mentioned that 68% of
session.